Right, so today we're going to speak about Daniel Defoe's The Life and Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. This was one of the first novels in the English language and in England in general. And it was written in the age of reason. So the main drives, the main motives, and the philosophy leading this novel are going to be affected and influenced by rationality, by the principles of rationalism. If you remember, we said that the factors that have led to the rise of the novel are merely the rise of a new middle class, which is the high middle class. This middle class was wealthy. They had a lot of money. They could afford anything they wanted, yet their culture was somehow limited, so they couldn't understand the medieval literatures or the literature that was written in a very elevated language. They preferred a literature that they could understand, that was written in a more or less simple language. One more thing is that they wanted to read something about themselves. Nobody ever spoke about them. Nobody ever spoke about the middle classes. And when someone is speaking about the English culture in general, the culture is always concerns the best. It always concerns the upper classes. Someone defined culture according to the 18th century perspective, and they said culture is the best that was said and told and done. Sorry, and while investigating the best that was said and done in the 18th century, it was realized that what is meant by the best that was said and done are the things that were said and done by the upper classes. Said, that is the literatures of the upper classes, that is the aristocratic or the classical literature, poetry and so on. And the best that was done, that is, in this case, we're speaking of the behaviors, the manners, the traditions of the upper classes. Okay, what this means is that in this literature, or what is meant by the best that was said and done, is that only the things that were done by the aristocratic class were actually were actually considered as culture. And the things that were done by the lower classes or the middle classes were not considered as culture. Okay, and here we are speaking about the mainstream culture. Mainstream culture, that is the culture of this community or of this country. So the culture, or the only things, the only literatures, the only behaviors or traditions that were considered as English culture were the things that were done by the upper classes. So one of the obstacles that met by the novel in the beginning is the idea that the novel reflected a culture that was entirely different from the British culture. Why? That's because the culture that was defined, or the culture that was represented by the novel, was that of the middle class, which looked nothing like that of the upper classes. Okay, so we're here speaking of something new. The novel is representing a new culture that was alien and different for the culture these people were accustomed to. Okay, it is not a culture that comes from a different country, but it's a culture that they never read about. In literature, they read only about the upper class. They read only about the aristocratic class. Okay, so they never read or heard about the things that the middle classes did. So by the rise of this high middle class, there was this demand for literature that represents them, for literature that speaks of their culture, of the things that they did, their daily lives, their adventures, as opposed to the classical literature, which never made any reference to them. So the novel, The Life and Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, is a novel that more or less reflects this culture. It reflects the life of a young middle class individual. And one of the things we have seen about the novel is that it pays particular attention to the individual of the middle class. The individual of the middle class becomes the center in the novel. Okay, and what is meant by the individual of the middle class becomes the center, that is, he is the protagonist, he is the center of the story or of the narration. The narration is not about someone from the upper class. It's not about a knight. You see, when we were studying, for example, Chaucer, everyone was had a title. Okay, it was about a kings, about the nobility, about knights, and so on. Same thing with Shakespeare. So we're no longer speaking about someone who has a title. We're no longer speaking of a nobility. We're speaking about someone from the middle class. So in the novel, the center is all about the middle class individual. It is the life of the middle class individual that is reflected, his thoughts, his feelings, his motivations, his dreams, and so on. Okay, the middle class of the middle class individual, sorry, becomes the center as opposed to the classical literature. This is why we no longer say hero, now we say protagonist. Why? Because the hero is someone who is definitely who follows certain rules. Okay, the hero is someone who follows certain a certain structure or a certain scheme, a model. Okay, they have to be from the upper class. They have to be someone who does great things. They have to be someone who is someone who is glorious, a great hero, someone who is going to save the entire village, who is going to save the princess, and so on. But the protagonist is a normal person. They are someone from the middle class. They are a very normal person. They are more lifelike than the traditional hero. Okay, this is why now we're using the term protagonist rather than hero. Okay, so now let's speak about Robinson Crusoe, or the life and adventures of Robinson Crusoe. Can anyone give me an overview of the novel? Now you can activate your microphones and speak. Can you? Come on. Do you know anything about the novel?
Hello.
Yes.
It's about the story about young adventurous young men love to travel and become seafarer, but their parents, his parents, urge him to stay at home. Actually, he settled at York, but he disobeyed them and go in adventure. And after a long time, he established his own money and.
Yes. I see. Hello. The voice is gone. Well, thank you very much, Azadine. You more or less you gave a good introduction of the novel. Could someone finish the narration or the summary of the novel? Your friend here just said it's about a young man who wanted to travel. His parents didn't want him to travel because they wanted him to be to become a law student. Actually, Robinson
And
Crusoe.
his way back when he was probably he shipwrecked, and in his way back to Africa in Brazil when he was loaded ship of slave. He shipwrecked in inhabited island when he spent 27 years there. He know how to survive there, and after a few years there were a clan of cannibals
Mhm.
with settled there, and he find a slave called him Friday.
Yeah, he saved
He made
someone. It wasn't a slave in the beginning. He saved him from death and then he made him his slave. Yes?
slave. Yes. They called him Friday and taught him how to the Christian beliefs, the Christian beliefs, yes.
Yes, I'm listening.
And then he managed to build his own boat and go to his home again.
Yes, very good. This is more or less a very brief summary of the novel. Thank you very much, Asdin. So yes, the novel is about a young man from the middle class. So see that all the aspects in this novel refer back to the 18th century novel. So you're going to find everything we spoke about reflected here. So he is a young man from the middle class who wanted to travel, to go overseas to practice trade and first to for adventure. He wanted to discover the world. And we know about the middle class of the 18th century that they were somehow adventurers. They were fascinated by adventure and by the things they could find overseas, but they also wanted to travel to become rich. And this is also one of the motivations of Robinson Crusoe. So he wanted to travel merely to make money, and also because he wanted to discover the world overseas. And his parents didn't want him to travel because he was their only son. They had a son who was older before, but he died at war, and they didn't want to lose their second son. So they wanted him to go to to study, law at university. Yet he didn't want to study that, and he decided to go overseas. So he disobeyed his parents, like you said, and he went for the adventure. First, he was wrecked at sea, and he found himself in Morocco, where he was enslaved. He managed to survive as a slave, and then he escaped the person who enslaved him in Morocco. He stole some money, he stole some weapons and a boat, and he escaped him. He traveled to Brazil, where he established a sugar plantation and became a rich man. And then he went for another adventure. Without going into many details, he went in for another adventure where he was planning to travel to the Caribbean, but the ship was wrecked at sea because of a tempest, and he lost all his friends. There's everyone who was with him on the boat died at sea. He was the only survivor. In the text that we have in hand, we have a part or the part of his struggle at the sea against the waves, which we're going to study later in detail. After he arrives to the desert island, he is lost. He doesn't know how to help himself or to sustain himself. He doesn't know where he's going to find food. But through time, or little by little, he learns how to build shelter, to find food, and so on. So he becomes a real survivor in the island, and he finds the weapons that were on the boat. He keeps them with him in the island, and whenever the cannibals arrived to the island, he scared them using these weapons. They thought that the island was inhabited or was haunted, so they didn't, or they stopped going there. Once they arrived to the island, they were there to kill someone, and he shot them. They escaped, and he saved the person they were about to kill. This person was a colored man. He wasn't truly a black man. He had a dark complexion, but he wasn't a black man. The way the man is described, he seems to be probably an African, North African, or maybe a Brazilian, but not a black man. Anyway, the man had a dark skin and soft hair, and Robinson didn't care about knowing or learning his name. He didn't care about learning anything about this man. He gave him a name. He said, your name is going to be Friday, based on the day on which he found him. And then he told him, he didn't teach him to say Robinson. Instead, he taught him to say master. Okay, he didn't teach him how to say Robinson. He didn't make him into a friend. He made him into a slave. So instead of calling him Robinson, he told him, call me Friday, call me master. So Friday could only say master. He never called Robinson by his real name. And he didn't teach him much of the English language and didn't care learning about Friday's language. He only taught him to say yes and no, thinking that these were the only words that Friday actually needed to know. Okay, so Friday could only say yes and no. He wasn't allowed, or he didn't have the chance to say anything else, because Robinson didn't try to learn his language, and vice versa. And then he decided to teach him Christianity. Friday was a cannibal. Robinson taught him that it was a bad thing to try to eat human flesh, sorry, and that he had to start eating vegetables instead. And he taught him about God, about Christianity, and he made him into a Christian. See that if we were to compare the white man and the black man in the novel, you would see one of the things that the history of humanity has suffered from for a long time. Now, have a look at this. This is the white man is represented in the character of Robinson Crusoe. Okay, so the white man arrives to this desert island. He saves a black man from death, or a colored man from death. He makes him into a slave. He is not interested in knowing his culture or his language, but he obliges him to learn the English language and to say only yes and no and nothing else. And then he makes him switch his religion to Christianity. Okay, that is the only religion this person is allowed to practice now. And whenever this person wanted to go back to his own or to his original traditions or his original religion, he wasn't allowed that. He was forbidden from doing that. He had to follow the culture and the norms of Robinson Crusoe, those merely of the white, learning the English language, speaking English, saying only yes and no, and being a Christian. Now, what do you think of this? Or in terms of, when I introduced this idea, I said this is one of the problems that the history of humanity has been suffering from. So what do you think this problem is? Anyone?
Racism?
Yes.
Racism?
Yes.
Yes, racism, Hasdin?
The theme or the hub of the story is about the slavery, since it's belong to colonialism. Yes.
Colonialism. Yes, very good. Okay, so this is the idea of colonialism. Racism is also a good thing, a correct idea, but we're going to speak about that later. The idea that I wanted to focus on now is that of colonialism, because it is one of the first and direct consequences of the Age of Reason. Okay, Daniel Defoe himself wasn't aware that he was talking as a colonialist while doing this, because they didn't see themselves as colonial. They saw themselves as spreading civilization in the world. Okay, you know, whether we're speaking of, yes, Asdin?
The white man burden.
The white man's burden, very good. Whether we're speaking about the French colonization or the English colonization, we're speaking of the white man's burden. That is the mission of civilization. That is, they are here, they thought that they were there to civilize the world, be it in Africa or in Latin America or in Southern America, in America in general. Okay, so if we're going to look at this, you're going to see a lot of aspects of colonialism in the novel. When Robinson, for example, arrived to Southern America in Brazil, he made his own sugar plantation. He started exploiting the land. He made people work in their land, and then he took the money, and that's part capitalism and colonialism. Okay, so both capitalism and colonialism are direct consequences of the Age of Reason. He started exploiting these people in their land. He took their money, and then even when he went back, he went to the desert island. He was still receiving the income of the plantation, and even when he went back to England after 30 years, he found himself still receiving the income of this plantation. Okay, so capitalism and colonialism occur here as direct consequences of rationalism. You can see it clearly. We can see them clearly in this novel. And whatever you are going to take in the history of humanity after the 18th century, you will find out that these two aspects, or these two I would say, huge problems, capitalism and colonialism, were the results of the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason. Okay, so even though the Age of Reason came to civilize man, maybe to provide technology and to develop man's life, it also has its negative aspects or negative consequences, like the birth of capitalism and colonialism. Okay, now, to go back to the novel, there are many other themes in the novel. Merely the
Yes.
idea of yes,
And
yes,
the birth of capitalism led to the birth of imperialism. Yes.
indeed, true. Okay, so you can think of these as they are interrelated. Okay, imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism. They are interrelated. Each one led to the other. Imperialism is just another form of colonialism. Um, Same thing for capitalism was born after colonialism. Maybe one of them led to the other. I cannot truly say which one led to the other, but they are interrelated. Each one of them helped the other grow and develop, and each one of them was a reason to make the other happen. Okay. So it was capitalism that led some people to invade others, and it was colonialism that made capitalism happen in such countries, or in some countries. Anyway, so these are some of the themes that you can find in the novel, but there are many other themes. For example, there is the theme of individualism. When we're speaking of individualism, we're speaking of the importance
Surviving.
and the centrality of man. Rehan, survival, yes, but
Yes.
um,
As well as instinct of survival, as well as instinct of survive, like sense of surviving for
yes,
Crusoe when he was wrestling the huge tide in the sea.
yes, very good. Yes, there is a theme of survival when he was fighting the waves, but we will speak about these later as we start the excerpt. Okay. One thing you should all retain in mind when we are doing this is that you should not. This is for your exams when you're writing your exam your essays during the exam. Do not speak of something that is not in front of you. Okay, what do I mean here? For example, we were speaking of the themes of individualism, colonialism, and so on, which occur at different times or at different levels of the story or of the novel. Survival happens at another level of the story. So do not, when you have an excerpt, and you are supposed to speak about the theme, always stick to the themes that you have in the excerpt in hand. Okay, today we are indeed speaking of an excerpt which speaks of survival, but we haven't started speaking about the excerpt yet. So when you have your excerpt in hand, always stick to the themes that you have in that excerpt. Do not mention all the themes that you found in the novel. Okay, What is the difference here? If you're going to mention all the themes that you found in the novel, that would mean you didn't understand the text. If you only stick to the theme that you have in the text and speak only of the theme that you have in the text, you are here showing that you have read the text, understood the text, and extracted your own conclusions, which is the point or the goal of literary analysis. Okay? So now we are speaking of the basic themes of the entire novel in general before we move to the excerpt. Okay? So we said the themes of capitalism and colonialism as direct consequences of the Age of Reason, which are highly reflected in the novel. There is also the theme of individualism, which is related to the principles of the Enlightenment. Okay, one of the main principles of the Enlightenment is the importance of man, the human being. Human being becomes the center of the universe. Sorry, Asdin? Can you repeat, please? Hello?
I want to say what you say. The center of the universe.
Yes, very good. So man is put at the center or is placed as the center of the universe. This means that everything on earth or everything in life should be there to serve man, to make man's life better and more amusing, I would say. No, easier. Okay. Even Alexander Pope wrote a poem in which he says the basic or the most important concern of science should be man, or the most important concern of the universe should be man. That is, science is there to serve man, to make man's life more easier and more interesting. The universe is there to serve man, to make man's life better. Okay, so the new philosophy is all about
First, little bit with the chain of being.
Excuse me?
It concerns a little bit with the great chain of being. For example, the human is most valuable or more important than animals or another creatures.
Or the creatures. Yes, actually, the idea or the reason why I'm focusing on the importance of man as a principle here is that everything that happened in the history of humanity later, after the birth of rationalism, came in relation to this idea, the importance of man and making man's life better. Technology, technological development, the invention of the car, the invention of the machine, computer, internet, everything is meant to make man's life better, okay? To provide more comfort to man's life, okay? So it all started because of rationalism, and it all started here. So individualism became a fashion. Individualism became a new, let's say, a new ideology that glorifies the human being, okay, and that considers the human being as the most important creature in the universe. So we can see individualism in the novel in the fact that Robinson Crusoe always favored himself in every situation. Even though, yes, we know he saved Friday from death. He made him into a form of a friend, if we would say so. But Friday was more a slave than a friend. Okay, so the character of Robinson Crusoe, he kind of embodies individualism. He is a representation of